Thank you very much. Hopefully you guys will be able to hear me okay, and hopefully the voice holds out. Today I'm going to talk about our project in the Chilean Patagonia in a community called Puerto Natales. But first I'll introduce ourselves. Our organization is called the Global Alliance for Animals and People, and we've been living and working in Chile since 2009. Our mission is to assist communities in finding sustainable solutions for the conflicts they face when they're managing lands and animals. And when we're talking about free-roaming dogs, there is absolutely no shortage of work in Chile for us. It seems like every day there's something about dogs in some newspaper in the country, and the topics range from things like there's just so many dogs in the streets, or it could be about the serious zoonosis we have in the country. And sometimes there's significant attacks, some fatal attacks in the country. Now, when we first arrived in Chile, it was really interesting to us that sterilization was really the only intervention that is consistently used throughout all the communities in the country, even though it is the only thing that is unlikely to address the majority of these problems that the community is complaining about. So we thought, well, maybe it's because sterilization is safe, and it's definitely not controversial. I don't think anyone's going to disagree that it's something that needs to be done. But when somebody comes up and proposes something completely new, or they talk about implementing maybe a new law or something to tack on to the sterilization programs, well, if you look at this slide and you talk about the conflicts that dogs have with people, you see there's just so many people involved in this issue, and we're talking from farmers to animal rights people, animal welfare. We've got veterinarians, we've got conservationists and wildlife rehabbers, we've got doctors and nurses, and the community at large. So, how do they ever agree on anything when there are different viewpoints and their opinions are just so absolutely different? So it winds up ending up in this huge conflict, and the whole thing comes to a grinding halt. So for us, very early on, we started to see it as something like this, and I'm guessing that half of you right now in the audience sees the man playing the horn, and maybe the other half of you sees the woman's face. And the free-roaming dog issue was like that. It's like that for us. So when people look at something like this, you get a real wide range of responses. Some people really like this. They're really happy when they see this. They like that dogs can express their normal behaviors in the street, while others find it sad because they're not at home with their owners. Others are completely terrified. They'll walk a mile around this pack of dogs, and others are angry. And then there's still others that are completely indifferent, and they don't see these dogs at all. So shortly after we started intensely working on the issue in Chile after we arrived, we realized very quickly that the human dimension was just critical in terms of developing sustainable solutions. But frankly, to be honest with you, we did not have the skill set. We did not have the tools to deal with this, although we knew how important it was. So I'm going to take you away from this, and I'm going to take you down to the bottom of the continent, to the southern cone, to a town called Puerto Natales. In 2010, we started developing a research project with some international partners, all of whom are in the audience right now, or here at this conference anyway. And the catalyst for this research project was the intense conflict between livestock and free-roaming dogs. But I'm not going to tell you any more about this project, except for the fact that by spending 2 years on the ground working on this field project, we developed some really, really intimate relationships with the community, and also with some of the government politicians. And here we're posing for a photo with the mayor. So I think what happened is, through a mutual collaborator, IFA heard about this, and they thought that maybe this would be a really good place, because of the relationship we had and because we were located, an NGO located and working in Chile, to implement for the first time their humane community development program. So they pitched the idea to us, and because we were already really interested in the human dimension, and this was a lot about that, we were really interested. And they explained sort of the general idea about this program would last for 2 years, and the first year would be all about implementing a series of workshops, looking at the issue in the community, and then having the community develop their own community plan. And then the second year would be implementing that plan and evaluating it at the end. So we talked to our partners in Natalis, and they too were all over the idea. They thought this was a really great plan. And so we went gung-ho. In July 2013, we met IFA down in Puerto Natalis, and we started the first workshop. And the idea here was to look at the source of the problem in the community. But the specific objectives were also to give the people a chance to be heard, to let them collectively describe their problem in their own community, and then look at what kind of strategies they're using and just how that's working for them. Now, I can't tell you all about the workshop because there's just not enough time, but there were two really neat things that happened during that 2-day workshop. And one of them was acknowledging people's point of view. Now, this was really important because the participants all arrived with their own agenda, not ours at all. They arrived, the environment was very highly charged. I think they were used to the idea that they would come and it would be this big hot debate and lots of conflict and yelling. And so there was a lot of high tension at the beginning. But what actually happened in the first activity was that every person was given 5 minutes just for them, just to introduce themselves and talk about their own personal position. And the other thing that was different was their position and their opinion was not up for debate. Everybody else just had to listen and acknowledge it. So that was really different. And the second thing that happened was kind of breaking the mold of the Chilean cultural hierarchy. And what I want you to note here is just look at the diversity of the people that showed up. These are the stakeholders. There were 25 representatives at this first workshop. And usually meetings down there are just a little bit more traditional, kind of with maybe a table up at front and the attendees down below in chairs. And someone's in charge and someone's definitely the participant. In this case, everybody was on a level playing field, and we started off getting to this point by doing kind of icebreaker exercises, and everyone just had a great time. And what it did essentially, these two initial activities, I think, was set the stage so that the next 2 days looked like this. And all of these people just worked together and got the job done. And at the end of the workshop, we asked through a very brief survey, how had their ideas changed about the dog problem in Natalis? And you can see that the majority of the people, 18 responders out of the 25, said that it had either changed a lot or they have a completely new perspective. So we were really encouraged, and we went off on to the second workshop in January of 2014. And the objectives of this one were to put together a community plan, but again, in a bit more detail. We wanted to give them the details about what the process looks like to do a community plan and how they take all those problems they had identified in workshop 1 and prioritize all of those, then come up with some kind of solutions that might be feasible given their resources in their particular location. And with all that, come up with some really clear objectives so they could measure at the end whether their plan worked or not. And after 2 days of really hard work, this is what their plan looked like. This is kind of a diagrammatic that they put together, but just to give you a written overview, what they wanted to do is pick a few management actions that would address as many problems as they could. So for them, it was really, really important. There's a lot of dogs on the street. The population of Natalis is about 20,000 people, and the most recent estimate was that there's about 4,000 dogs on the street. So for them, it was really important to get some of these dogs off the street. And their thinking behind this was one thing. One positive result would be less fecal contamination in public areas. The reason this is so important for them is because of hydatid disease. And hydatid disease is really, really high prevalence. You can see down here the darkest part in the southern cone. It's a parasite, a tapeworm parasite that normally cycles between dogs and herbivores, but humans that have exposure to infected feces from the dog can become infected and it can be fatal. So this is very, very important for them. The other thing that they were hoping by getting some of these dogs off the street was that there would also be a lower human-to-dog contact rate, which could potentially reduce the number of bites, could reduce the fear that people have by walking through the streets, and could increase community hygiene. But the other thing is that most of these dogs are presumed owned in the streets. So they didn't want these dogs killed. That's not what their intention was. They wanted owners to be more responsible for their own dogs and start containing them appropriately in their own backyards. And so they had this idea that they wanted to improve welfare for these dogs that were being removed from the streets and going into backyards. So with that, they came up with 4 objectives, and I'm going to go through each one. The first one, as I mentioned, is to reduce the number of dogs in the street. Their goal is 10% in 1 year, but in targeted areas throughout the town. What they want to do is launch this enormous public outreach campaign with a series of messages to reach their goals. They also want to target people and speak to them about this reduction of dogs in the street through a microchipping campaign. And also, at the end of all this, they want to enforce. And their enforcement that they're proposing is active enforcement. So people will go out into the streets, look for microchipped dogs, give the owners warnings, and then repeat offenders will eventually get fines. And how are they going to evaluate this? What they're planning on doing is a simple walk-through street dog survey. So they'll count the dogs before the intervention, and then they'll count them again after the intervention. The second objective is to increase the number of dogs in the yards that are in good condition by 10% in those same targeted areas. So what they're planning on doing is going through the public outreach campaign again, and this is their second message, and this is where I was talking about the animal welfare part of their plan. And how are they going to evaluate this one? What they're planning on doing is an observational study where they'll look at the dogs in the backyards and they'll do a very simple welfare study. So they'll look at things like, does the dog have food? Does it have water and appropriate housing? What's its body condition score? And do they have any obvious diseases or injuries? And this will be done pre and post again. The third objective of their plan is to increase public knowledge in the whole city by 50% about how responsible dog ownership can also prevent hydata disease. Again, this is their third message in the public outreach campaign, and they're going to be talking to people about what they need to do when they contain dogs, what's appropriate containment, and also that they should be deworming every X number of weeks in order to prevent hydata disease. Their evaluation for this one is a little different. They're looking at a high traffic supermarket, so they can do a very brief questionnaire pre and post, and this is a really kind of cost and time effective way of getting at their answer. And the last objective of their plan is to increase public knowledge in the whole city by 50% again about the canine municipal law. And this is their fourth message in the public outreach campaign. They'll also be spreading the message through their microchipping campaign. And the way that they'll be evaluating this one, whether it works, is through the supermarket questionnaire pre and post. Okay, so I just wanted to remind you about the first and second year. And right now we're going to go on. I'm going to show you a little bit more detail about how they've laid out the second year. So the first part coming right up is going to be the surveys that I mentioned, the street survey, the observation survey, and the supermarket survey, and that's essentially their baseline data. Next is their public outreach campaign that I've been mentioning over and over again, and they're calling it painting the city. They're going to paint the city with these messages, and what they want to do, just to remind you, is tell the people about the bylaw. The bylaw, this is what it is, and it's coming. They're telling them they have to microchip their dog. They're telling they will be enforcing after this public outreach campaign is over, and they're also telling them that when you put a dog in the backyard, this is what you need to be doing. At the same time, they'll be doing the microchip campaign, and their goal is to microchip 1,700 dogs in targeted areas. The next section is the start of enforcement, and here again they'll start with warnings and then fines. And lastly, they'll repeat the surveys from the initial session, and they'll repeat them after the intervention to see if they've reached their goals. So, what are the lessons we've learned so far? Well, there were some things that have been really, really amazing. And I think really importantly is that these people have found a shared vision despite all those diverse personal viewpoints. Some of the people have stepped up and assumed really, really strong positions of leadership that they did not have in the community before. Collectively, this group has been really original, and they've come up with some creative ideas. And one of them is that they wanted to name their campaign, and they called it Natales con Garras, which means Natales with claws. So it's kind of implying that they're taking this on to themselves, and they're going to deal with this problem themselves. Also, the community and the politicians as a whole are willing to take a political risk, because enforcement, I think we all know that this is a necessary part of dog management, but nobody really wants to do it. And I'm not aware of any other community that is doing active enforcement in the country yet. And also there is this sustained, relaxed hierarchy among the group members, so they're very relaxed among one another. It's really nice to work with them. But obviously there were some things that were really difficult as well. For us, keeping the motivation and excitement up within this group when we were not having scheduled visits in the community was sometimes difficult. It was kind of like this, up and down, up and down. The other thing that happened was that we had consistency of our stakeholders, but they didn't always send the same representative. So that was really difficult, because sometimes that representative had not been at the workshop, so they had no idea what was going on, and we had to nip that in the bud really quickly. There's a lot of cultural formalities in the towns, and we spent a lot of time that we didn't anticipate writing letters and doing formal invitations just to run a simple meeting. And along that same line, getting meetings, there's communication difficulties. Some people just don't use email, they don't have internet, while others just never answer their phones. So a very simple meeting can take a long time to plan. Another thing we found is that sometimes when things get rough and they're difficult or they're challenging, people tend to go back to the default. They just want to sterilize. Let's just sterilize, because everybody's used to it and everybody accepts it. So we just kind of have to go repeat the process a little bit and get them all back on track again. And the truth is that I think having faith in the process, everybody has difficulty with that at different times because nobody knows what's going to happen. But anyway, we're getting good feedback, and this is just a couple quotes I wanted to share with you from what the people are saying. Someone said, "That was one of the fears I had, thinking that we would be using a method designed for kids. It's childish. I thought, I'm going to be bored, other people are going to be bored, and at the end of the year, we're not going to get anywhere." Well, I now realize that that was not the case at all. I now realize that it is a good method. It is effective. I wish all workshops would be like this. And somebody else said, "The approach is so good because it makes a meeting very enjoyable, and it is like one is almost having fun, and solutions are reached having full enjoyment. It is way more enjoyable to reach a solution in that manner than spending the time just talking and following certain formalities." And you can see here, I don't know if you can see in this picture, but honestly, half the time people just spent cracking up. They're having a great time. They worked really hard, and they got through the activities and got everything done, but they really did have a good time. And some people want to know what we say, because we're the NGO that's kind of in the middle between IFA and between the community. And it's been interesting for us too. We've seen a really dramatic change in how the people see the issue. And they talk about it being a human problem rather than a dog problem right now. So that's really great for us. And truthfully, it's been an emotional and bonding process for us. It's very intimate. We found that this group at least blames the government a lot less, and there's a lot more community accountability for the dog situation in general. There is kind of this sustained respect for different viewpoints. And this, I think, to me is the most important thing. Going back to this diagram, it's just their different viewpoints are no longer a stumbling block for finding solutions. They're working their way through it. The other thing is that the community is taking ownership of the process. And you can see here in this picture early on, we really helped them through some of the activities. You know, we even had to write down some of the stuff that they were telling us. But shortly, it didn't take long, and they really stepped up. Like this police officer.
Pretty advanced.
Okay, it's almost done, yeah. This police officer here is taking complete charge of this activity. And in this case here, this community this group is completely engaged in a discussion, and we are not part of it at all. So what does the future hold for this community? We don't know. It is, again, we have to remind ourselves, it's a pilot project and we're all learning as we go. The interesting thing, I think, is going to be the enforcement, because as the public responds to fines and penalties, we don't know how the politicians will respond in turn to that. So that's going to be a really interesting and key component of this. But in any case, we're sure that we are going to leave this community with more skills and capacity than when we did arrive. We know that they have a new way of relating to one another, and we know that they have a new toolkit for dealing with conflict. So we'll see what the next year holds, and we will keep you posted. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk about the actual implementation of the humane community development. The floor is open for a question or two, I think, if there are some. Please state your name and institution. Probably, do you want to ask your question first?
I can repeat the question back.
Out of curiosity, do you think that the community chose an effective approach to solve their issues?
Do I think that the community has chosen an effective approach to solve their issues? That's the million-dollar question. I guess that's why I said I'll keep you posted. You know, I think, I don't know. I'm not sure. We have another year to go. They're going to spend the entire year on implementation of their plan, and we're going to see how it goes. There have been a lot of challenges. It has been really different and sometimes very difficult. However, this whole process is so new and it's so different, and just to see the community, the way that they respond to it is completely different. So truthfully, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows if they will accomplish their objectives, but I think that this has changed the community for the positive, for sure. And if this does not work, I think that they may adapt this to still move forward. I don't think that they'll go back to just using sterilization. So, and I think that alone will be a success.
Is that okay? Ooh, okay. Okay, Caroline Yates from the Mayhew in London. I'm interested to find out how, when you were setting up the stakeholder group, presumably you were already a respected organisation in that community, so they knew you. Were you the only animal welfare organisation in that community, working in that community?
No, there is one other. We don't live in that community. We live in a different community of Chile, but we had spent a few years there working on the previous project. So we did not choose the stakeholders either.
Okay.
So there is one animal welfare group, and they are kind of a group that goes through streets and picks up dogs, and they have relationships with the vet clinics. And
so how was the stakeholder group initiated? Because was there an open forum for the whole community to come and see, or were people nominated by different groups?
What we did to pick the stakeholders was that we did consultations with key people throughout the community that we already were aware of, and those people were one of them. So we asked, and we didn't just open it up because then anybody could come, and we really needed people to have some say, some kind of representation for somebody. There's enough meetings where just the general public can go and discuss things, but we needed people who were able to make decisions and knew something about the issue. So we consulted with the municipality, with all different government agencies, with private agencies, with just key people in the community, and they came up. Also a really important part of our group, as well as neighborhood groups. Neighborhood groups are a huge thing in Latin America, and they represent all their different neighborhoods. So we had presidents. They were all sent formal invitations, explained the process, and those who decided to come were then able to come.
And you were able to find venues in which to meet on a regular basis?
Pardon me?
You were able to find venues in which to meet on a regular basis?
They provided venues, yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Do we have time for another question? Okay.
Okay, I have a question. When you are starting to microchip the dogs, that I don't understand. There is a free roaming dogs that nobody knows to whom they belong. Nobody knows I'm in authority. And now you decided that 50% of them will be microchipped. And then in this way, somebody become an owner, because if you're microchipping the dog, you are registered. It should be registered on somebody. Mm-hmm. And then now what they decided that it's acceptable to them that these dogs will not free roam on the street, they will sit at home or go only on the leash. Because I cannot understand the purpose.
I'll explain. They're targeting dog owners. They're not going to be just taking dogs from the street and microchipping them. So their microchipping campaign will be house to house. The idea is that according to the studies that have been done, and they're not a lot, but there are some that are done, and they're presuming that close to 95% of the dogs in most Chilean communities are owned. So the real target here is the dog owner, not the dog. So what they're doing is they're going to be going house to house on these microchipping campaigns. And so what they want to do is associate a dog that lives in the street with no supervision to an owner that lives over here. And that's the only way that the enforcement is going to work. Because when they go out and they're scanning for a microchip, if the dog has no home, there's no one that's really going to be accountable for that dog. So they're looking to make owners accountable for the dogs, and the majority of the dogs supposedly are in the street.
Yeah,
so.
This was I want to understand. And the dogs then will not free roam. It should be a community understanding, or we believe that from now, when the dog is microchipped, he will stay at home or walk on the leash or with the owner, not roaming. Because if he's roaming around, that what is the difference? For what you will fund the owner? if they agree, if they understood what is the meaning that you are microchipping the dog, somebody is getting full responsibility if the dog bites or dog run away or whatever.
Yes, yes, they do. And this is part, you see if you remember the slide that I showed you, the one that shows the progression of their plan, their public outreach campaign is going to be advertising what they're doing. So first of all, they explain about the bylaw. They'll be explaining that microchipping will be mandatory, although they will be only starting with 3 to 4 communities because they only have 1,700 chips. And so the people in the community will be aware of this. It's a 6-month public outreach campaign. It's going to be on TV, on the radios, in the newspapers. It's going to be, as they call it, they paint the town, and they have experience doing this. They're the first community in Chile that eradicated the use of plastic bags in their entire community, and this is how they did it. So they've used something that is proved in their community. It worked well. They're going to do exactly the same thing. They're going to paint the town with this message, and the people will know that enforcement is coming. It is in the bylaw, and it is a legal thing that they'll be enforcing. So people know why they'll be microchipping, that the microchip will link the dog to the person, and they will be accountable for that dog. I hope I'm answering your question.
No, I'd like to understand only one thing. If in the bylaw is that the dog is not allowed free roam, it is there or not? This
Okay,
is my
that's
question.
the last question, please, because we have to go on.
Okay, so the question being, is it in the bylaw that the dogs are not allowed on the street? Yes, it is. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.